Dear viewers, this is LogosTV, Coptic Civilization program. I'm Michael Saad. Thank you for watching our program. Today will be the subject on martyrs en route to the monastery. The monastery being St. Samuel of Calamon in Upper Egypt, in the governorate of Minya. On the 26th of May, Black Friday, many Copts were martyred en route to the monastery. And the world reacted for this heinous act of murdering and injuring peaceful Christians going to the desert to pray, to have communion with God and with each other, to benefit from the spiritual atmosphere of the monastery that has been there for 16 centuries. And it was not an isolated case. Only a few weeks earlier, on Palm Sunday, 2 churches were bombed. St. George Cathedral in Tanta and St. Mark Cathedral in Alexandria, the 2,000 years old church on the site where St. Mark, the evangelist, started his mission in Egypt, preaching the gospel of peace and converting Egyptians one by one to the knowledge of Christ. In the St. Peter and St. Paul Church in Cairo, on the 9th of December 2016, another strapped suicide bomber blew up himself, and tens of people were killed and injured. Pope Francis attended a service in that church later on the 28th of April 2017, along with the ecumenical patriarch of Constantinople. They were hosted by His Holiness Pope Tawadros II, and along with patriarchs and archbishops of the Middle East. It's a difficult time Middle East Christians have been through since the United States invaded Iraq in 2013, or 2003 actually, 14 years ago. The Middle East has been devastated, but Middle East Christians have been going through a very difficult time. This is all well known to you, our viewers. Today we want to not to mourn and grieve, but to celebrate life, because what ends here as martyrdom starts there, up in heaven, in the bosom of the Heavenly Father, in the bosom of Christ, who promised us not paradise on earth, and not paradise in heaven for the flesh, but for the spirit. Christ is risen from the dead, and he has conquered death and gave life to those who are in the tombs, to those who believe in him. And the Copts kept faithful to Christ, the heavenly bridegroom. When the Copts in that day were surrounded by the murderers, they were given opportunity to quit the faith and live according to the flesh. They refused, as did the Copts for 2,000 years. They refuse conversion from their Christian faith. They refuse unfaithfulness. If God so loved the world that he gave his only Son as a ransom on our behalf for our redemption, the Coptic Christians in Egypt for 2,000 years reciprocated by offering their love, their sacrifice unto death. Martyrdom on the road to the monastery. Our episode today, I'm honored to have two guests, one with me in the studio, Professor Fatin Guirguis, Professor of English at Polk State University in Florida. Welcome, Dr. Fatin.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
It's always a great pleasure and honor for me to host you and our program. And your contributions to Coptic studies and to connect Coptic life over 2,000 years, especially Coptic literature, to the current life, to Coptic identity, is always very interesting and stimulating and intellectual, a mix of intellectual and spiritual inspiration. So thank you again.
Thank you. I'm always happy to be with Logos viewers
Thank
and
you.
Logos staff. It's always a wonderful opportunity.
Thank you. Later in the program, we will have a second guest, Professor Nelly van Doorn-Harder, Professor of Islamic Studies at Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and author of many books in Coptic studies and in Islamic studies. And we will celebrate life. Christ is risen. So by the end of the program today, we will sing together with St. Kirill Choir from London, Christ is risen from the dead. By death, he conquered death. What is the story of the 26th of May, 2017, en route to the monastery? We'll hear the ABC News in video number 1, Eyewitness News 7, the local channel in Chicago, reporting about the event, and especially there is a Coptic family from Chicago area, the town of Tinley Park, just on the south side of Chicago. The grandparents went to Egypt to see their children and grandchildren. They went to the monastery on that day in that bus, along with their children and grandchildren, and that family has provided 5 martyrs on that day. The grandfather, 2 of his sons, and 2 of his grandchildren. We will watch the video by the grandmother who was injured and stayed in hospital there, and listen to her story of forgiveness to the perpetrators, to the aggressors, to the killers. She forgives, she even blesses them, and she asks divine providence for them. We'll watch some of that video in Arabic, but we'll give it translation.
Friends at South Suburban Church offering prayers for a Tinley Park man and his family that were killed in a bus attack in Egypt. Today, the Pope called the victims martyrs. Here's Eyewitness News reporter Kate Kogirin.
Your families have heard Sunday service at St. George Coptic Orthodox Church in Moni, Father Samuel Azmi paused to honor fellow parishioner Mohsen Morkis and his family killed in Friday's attack.
The attackers, they pointed a gun to their heads and they asked them if they would denounce Christ and convert to Islam or they'll be killed. And they chose to die.
Morkis, his 2 sons, his 4-year-old granddaughter, and other family members were killed after ISIS gunmen opened fire on their bus traveling to a religious site. His wife, Samia Ibrahim, was one of the few survivors. The Tinsley Park couple's nephew, Georgia, says his aunt is doing well, but is still in disbelief.
Whatever how many words we're going to tell her to let her, forget this, nothing will cover.
Georgia says his family's strength to get through this tragedy is their faith, prayer, and forgiveness for those who attacked his uncle and his family.
I'm not mad from anybody. And we pray for them, and we was praying for them right now.
Today in St. Peter's Square, Pope Francis spoke out in solidarity with Egypt's Coptic Christians, calling all the victims in the deadly bus attack martyrs. Father Azmi echoed that message in his comments to the congregation.
This is the ultimate sacrifice that any Christian can give.
Family members tell me Mohsen Markos and the rest of his family members that were killed in the attack were buried in Cairo on the same day they died. In Moni, Kate Kogirin, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
Wow. It's each time we review and listen again to the story and what the world has, how the world has reacted, is really touches the heart and make you wonder, are we living in the last days? What happened to the world? Dr. Fatin, Guirguis, what's your first reaction to this event? And how did you live the last 2 weeks with this event in your mind and heart?
Actually, unfortunately, this event, this sort of events recur. It has become a recurring thing. So, if I tell you how when the events happened, the first one, when it happened during Palm Sunday, I was actually in France. And I just landed from the flight when somebody contacted me from the United States to make, actually someone from Coptic Solidarity contacted me so that we can do a presentation, to make an interview on a network. It touches your life. You can imagine, I was going to attend a conference there, and I was participating in a conference, but you can imagine what is it like to, be caught in these events and not be able to break away from them, because they literally, first of all, the shock, the grief, the being upset about it, and then making sense out of it. And I mean, how did these people feel? And it touches our life here and our life, back home. And you think about, did anybody of your family die? And even if nobody was hurt, how many of the cops there are suffering? Why is this happening? It sort of opens the doors of hell. It opens the intellectual doors of hell on everyone to question their faith, to question, had I been in this position, would I have been able to do what they have done? And then, step away from or distance yourself from the event and say, oh, maybe, yeah, this is martyrdom, they have a better life now. Maybe we can put hope and rejoice in this, as you've just said, or, think about justice and retribution in the world, what needs to happen in the political system in Egypt. As I said, it opens the doors of hell for every Coptic Christian, and for every, and to be honest, I think for every Muslim as well. One questions, why does this happen? One questions their identity, who they are, the person who kills and the person who is killed. It's a moment where you have to face everything that you believe in, and either reinforce it or reject it. As I say, it's a defining moment. And I find them intellectually draining. Each time this happens, I'm intellectually drained. I think about it in many, many levels, and on the intellectual level. Think about my friends who are Muslims, and I think about my family that is Coptic, and I think about my personal commitment to my faith and the personal commitment that each one of us has to his faith. And I think about the Egyptian government, and I think about justice, and I think about the ideology that is there in Egypt, the educational system, the mosques, the people, how did they react, the whole community, did the hospitals do what they have to do? And we get these reports where, you know, there are many problems, and we know that these exist, and we think about the communal mentality and the communal agreement that something like this can happen in broad daylight, and people can get away with it. You know, there are, as I say, it's a defining moment. It's a very sad moment, and it is very unfortunate that it keeps recurring. You know, and every time this recurs, yeah, all of us are, you know, especially me, because I specialize in persecution, I'm always invited. Unfortunately, every time I'm invited to make to do an interview on television, it's about an event like this one. It's, as I say, you know, something that is very disturbing.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. There is amazing response by the relatives of the victims and those who were injured, and some of them died in hospital later. That's one remarkable observation that will come and cover in the list of the episode today. Also, the position of the church is amazing, and there are many radiating lights in this event, like a granddaughter called Julia, who gave witness. Amazing. She saw blood spattered around her from relatives, and she's still composed. And His Grace Bishop Raphael in the eulogy remarked about this particular girl that under normal worldly expectations, this girl would go to mental hospital to recover, and with psychological counseling and remedy and chemical medicine to calm her down. But this girl is full of grace, full of grace. The grandmother from Tinley Park, Illinois, who saw the death of 5 of her family around her. The killers were not only killers for the sake of God, but they were also robbers for the sake of money. So they robbed the women from their jewelry and took the wallets of the men before they killed them. So killers, robbers, etc. Now, as you mentioned, you watch also the reaction of the community. Like, for example, these 4 bombing or killing events, mass killing events in 4 provinces of Egypt, Minya, Cairo, Tanta, and Alexandria. You get different reactions in the hospitals, in the police stations, in the total bureaucratical hierarchy, and the community, and the religious Muslim and Christian religious establishments, different in each one, as if they are 4 different countries, or 4 different kind of people, or communities, or education, or brainwashing. For example, the clerk who wrote the death certificate in Ilmania lied in the certificate and said it's traumatic shock. Somebody saw something bad, so he died. Where in reality, they have bullets in their body. Why the clerk in Ilmania, the latest event, lies in? Because he hates Christians. He wants to deprive that family from insurance, from income, from financial assistance by the government given to people who are killed. So he reduces the description from murder to traumatic shock. true, the government is to be thanked that that person was punished and the event was corrected, but only after his family and the church intervened with higher authorities. But in such cases in the past, he would have gone, it would have gone unnoticed, and his family would go to court for 5 years to correct that. And that tells us that something positive happened in Egypt in the last few years, especially with the rise of the current president, President Sisi. Something different that happened in Egypt, and we will come to that later. But I am also so glad that the church had a modified message or evolving message, that now that the events have been happening one after the other, the church is not bashful in representing a comprehensive view of the thing. Yes, while we forgive, we also wanted the aggressor to be a better human being. Because if I keep the killers killing, they are earning divine judgment that we do them a favor, redeeming them from this killing spirit. They are possessed by devils that push them to kill. Can kill be for the sake of God, really? Can any divine presence be watching one person killing his brother in the humanity of any religion? Do I take the law in my hand to kill the murderer? That's not spiritual, it's not civilized, it brings God's judgment. Let us watch video number 2 with His Grace Bishop Angelos, General Bishop in London, on a BBC interview, Hardline. True, it was recorded before the latest event en route to St. Samuel Monastery in Menia, just a week before, after the 2 events in Palm Sunday, but it's the same message, the same church message. Very spiritual and intellectual, role model.
Bishop Angelos, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you.
Do you think there is something substantively different about the nature of the threat faced by Coptic Christians in Egypt today? Because they've faced threats for many, many years.
Well, yes, we've faced threats for centuries, and particularly over the past decades. But to have suicide bombers in churches is a shift, and it looks like the mirroring of attacks in other parts of the world. And I think that's why it's shocked the Egyptian community generally so much, Christians and Muslims. We haven't seen this level of aggression and violence. We've had attacks which have been equally painful, but this does mark a very new chapter.
And does that mean, I mean, since we saw the, as you say, the suicide bomb attacks on 2 churches, the cathedral in Alexandria, the church in Tanta, does that mean that Christian communities have to think more carefully than they have before about self-protection?
Well, of course, we saw a heightened security around the churches in lead up to the Easter celebrations. The community is resilient, it's strong, it's very faithful in its worship, it's very forgiving, but it does have to be more careful. I've said in the past week that what is ironic is that these churches were bombed, attacked when they were full, and that was after only 2 months after the bombing in Cairo. So it hasn't dissuaded people from going to church.
Well, you talk about resilience, and I appreciate, as you've just said, that those churches are still being filled, but there are signs that Egyptian Copts are scared in a new way. I'm thinking of what we've seen in El Arish, a small town in northern Sinai, where the so-called IS group made explicit threats saying, we are going to come after you, Christians, and we are going to kill you. And we saw some deaths, but we also saw many Christians fleeing, leaving the community altogether. Do you believe that that is an inevitable response, that that was the sensible response?
Well, at that time it definitely was the right response, because they felt, because they had been undergoing attacks for weeks leading up to that. But at that point they realized they had no more sustainable presence there and their families were at risk. So they moved to surrounding dioceses that absorbed them. I don't think I would use the word fear. I don't think I've heard any of our church leadership or indeed our community use the word fear, but they are concerned and they have every right to protect their families. They did that in this particular instance by leaving, but they remain targeted because they can't all become internally displaced.
An interesting phrase used by one of your colleagues, Bishop Macarius of Minya Diocese. He said, we can now consider ourselves to be living through a wave of persecution. Is this an era of outright, sustained persecution, in your view?
I think we've lived a history of persecution throughout our presence in Egypt, and it's intensified at various times. In our contemporary history, ever since the presence of the former President Saad, when Islamists were given a slightly greater reign, and so they started to divide up the community in that way, Christians became a more visible and more legitimate target for them.
It's a fault line, isn't it? I mean, it seems to me, and I'm looking at the analysis of experts in Islamism in Egypt, like Naji Sharab, he says the intent here is to make a separation between Muslims and Christians and to start an outright religious conflict in Egypt. That is what the so-called Islamic State is all about. Can they succeed?
I don't think so. They haven't so far. So whether it was after the bombing in Cairo or these bombings, Egypt is very different to the rest of the Middle East. There isn't a tribal presence there. It's much more a homogeneous presence. And in actual fact, what we see after every one of these attacks is a greater support from the greater Muslim community, because they see themselves and their communities as targeted as well. So it doesn't make us more marginalized. People have come out to support. The outpouring of support and shock that we've seen in the community, both in Egypt and globally as a result, is a telltale sign of that.
Well, to that extent you strike me as an optimist, but you could flip your argument around and say it is striking the degree to which the state, personified of course by President Sisi, but by the machinery of the state, still doesn't take what would seem to me to be basic structural measures to ensure that the long-term discrimination against Coptic Christians in Egypt is addressed. You know, there's the short term, there's the 3-month emergency, there's, I think, a specific new law about church construction. But many Copts say, you know, what about what is taught in schools? What about the horrible extremism that comes from some mosques? Why are these things not addressed?
I think we're starting to see that addressed in the past few months, and I think it's going to take a generation. This sort of thought process has infiltrated the education system, the general society, so much that it has to be replaced by something else. So the curricula have to change. The sense of citizenship, belonging to the country as a citizen, it has to change, and Christians have to be seen as part of that fundamental presence and as indigenous people who are living alongside their Muslim brethren as well.
I mean, I've spent time reporting for Hard Talk in Upper Egypt. Some of the towns around Aswan, Minya, other towns along the Nile, going all the way down south, you still find many communities where Christians do feel that their security is constantly under threat. And the government knows it, but still doesn't seem to do much about it.
That has been the weak point. So at the national level, I think we're hearing very legitimate, very sincere promises from the President, from the government, from the national security services. But when one comes down to the local level, to the villages, to the districts, where there's a sense of impunity because crimes go unreported sometimes because they realize that there's not going to be investigated properly, there'll be no replies, there'll be no convictions, and so therefore there's a ratcheting up, there's an intensification of the kind of attack, and it becomes more deadly every day.
Yes, His Grace Bishop Angelos has articulated the Church position on the subject, and also the spiritual and biblical position the message of Christ. If Christ was among us today, what would he have said? We know, of course, that Christ, on some other Friday, has offered himself as a sacrifice on the cross. His blood, he bleeded to death, and for our salvation. And that's the mystery of Coptic resistance. His Grace Bishop Angelus spoke of genocide and of dislocation of Coptic families. There is, in the last 40 years, there is more than 500,000 Copts were forced to go out to leave their towns for one reason or another, but all under persecution of the surrounding community. Threats. They just pushed them out from one town to another. That has been happening for 40 years. And the silence of the world in the last 5 years for the dislocation of Coptic Christians, of Christians in Iraq and Syria, and they don't even get any percentage of significance in the United States immigration laws or even practice. The laws are in the books, but the practice, the number of refugees from the Middle East to the United States, although they were the primary target of ISIS, there are the lowest of the lowest percentage of admitted refugees in the United States. That's for another episode to talk about it, but that's one can Google and find the truth. Back to genocide and dislocation. But there are positive things. For the first time in 40 years, the last 2-3 years, the Egyptian press changed attitude toward Coptic victims. Throughout the reign of Hosni Mubarak, the late president, reporting if such event happened in Egypt, like the Monastery of St. Samuel's on Black Friday, the 26th of May, if it happened 20 years ago, the Egyptian press would never report it. Zero. Other events happened and nobody in the world heard about, like El Kosh in 1998. There were very big, large number of Coptic Christians died in El Kosh in 1998, and in 2000, on the eve of 31st of December, the eve of the New Year, 2000. Many Copts were killed, were thrown out of balconies, were set on fire. And the world hardly knew about it, because that's before the age of cell phone cameras and the internet, etc. And after some foreign correspondents would write about it, then the Egyptian media would come out and make fake stories like as such. Here is this. This is a cliche. If you Google the following cliche, you will get hundreds of reports in the Egyptian media. And because they are the source of the Associated Press and the Reuters, and you get the same kind of cliche in Reuters and the Associated Press. Here is the cliche. Clashes between Christians and Muslims resulted in 80 deaths and injuries from both sides. That's a cliche. Even the White House, on one occasion, repeated that same cliche. 81 killed and injured from both sides. You know what was the truth of that cliche, or that particular that I'm repeating now? It was the murder bomb blast at the doors of the All Saints Church in Alexandria on the eve of New Year 2011. 21 Christians were killed while they were going out of the church at the time. 60 were injured, and when Muslim was injured, he would stand by on the other side of the road. So for one Muslim injured, because he happened to be 15 meters away, 80 Copts were injured and killed. They lump them together and repeat the same cliche. Now, for the first time, the president of Egypt, President El-Sisi, goes out in these 4 occasions, the latest occasion, and previous occasions, and make national mourning for 3 days. The Egyptian flag is at half-staff. He sends retaliation aeroplanes to bomb the suspected places of camps of training of these terrorists. And Egyptian media, a lot of good Muslim voices are outraged and express an outrage. This is novel. This is new. One man, 10 people, 12 people. We know how St. Mark evangelized Egypt single-handed in the year around 50 AD. Single-handed, one person can make a whole lot of difference. I'm honored and pleased that Professor Nelly van Doorn-Harder will appear to us now. And welcome, Professor. I would like to introduce her. She is the author of The Emergence of the Modern Coptic Papacy, this book by American University in Cairo Press. She is also the author of this book. By the way, she is a co-author with Dr. Magdi Guirguis. They covered the last 400 years of Coptic history from the lens of Coptic patriarchs. So she's the author. She covered the last about 200 years, and Dr. Magdi Guirguis the previous 200 years. She is also the author of another famous book, Contemporary Coptic Nuns. You can find these books on Amazon.com. Contemporary Coptic Nuns. She was a friend of Tamav Irini of St. Mercurius convent in Cairo. And she did her dissertation, PhD dissertation in Leiden University on contemporary Coptic nuns. And she wrote about Coptic nuns in not only in the English language, but also in the Dutch language and in the Indonesian language, where she served as professor there for 5 years of Islamic studies. And now she is professor of Islamic studies at Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Another of her books is Between Desert and the City, the Coptic Orthodox Church Today. And forthcoming book very soon in press, Copts in Context, Negotiating Identity, Tradition and Modernity. She is editing this book. It will soon appear. But why especially, of course, it's an honor and pleasure, and she appeared on LogosTV many times before in person and Skype. And if you go to YouTube and search for Coptic civilization, you will get her 4 previous episodes, one on the work of His Holiness Pope Tawadros II. What attracted me is Professor Van Doorn online. Okay. What attracted me also to invite her is her recent article on the Huffington Post under the title 29 Coptic Christians Murdered en route to a Monastery, 29 New Martyrs Born. That's a very nice title, 29 New Martyrs Born. And the Huffington Post is like other mainstream media in America. Unfortunately, they don't care much about Christianity in general, let alone Coptic Christianity, and they have their own agenda. And to publish something favorable to persecuted Christians anywhere in the world is an uphill battle with all these outlets. So for Professor van Doorn-Harder, who publishes frequently in scholarly magazines and journals, and also in American newspapers, that's a great, I consider it personal favor for me, and as a Copt, I am grateful. She puts the scholarly perspective on such events. And the conclusion of this article reads, after each attack, the previous, especially the modern, several attacks, Copts regain strength, drawing courage from the martyrs, the old and the new ones, as one day they themselves might be forced to join that heavenly troop. Very positive, and she draws upon the resilience of the Copts over 2,000 years, and they're continuing that indeed not only the Copts are the modern sons of the pharaohs, but also they are the modern sons of St. Mark, St. Athanasius, St. Cyril, St. Samuel the Confessor, that, and the 1 million martyrs at the time of Diocletian, and 2,000 years of martyrdom. Welcome, Professor Nelly van Doorn-Harder.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for accepting my invitation to appear on Coptic civilization. As happened in the past, we are always grateful for such opportunities, and would like to take your wisdom. And if you didn't hear me, I expressed gratitude for your recent article in the Huffington Post that was posted on the 29th of May 2017, only 3 days after the 26th of May, Good Friday, or Black Friday, whichever one may call it. Both ways are good for Christians to express their appraisal of the event. What motivated you to write this article, and what's different this time in the Egyptian attitude toward Coptic dilemmas and tragedies as such?
Well, Dr. Michael, thank you for inviting me, for letting me explain this. I think it is, like your other guest, Dr. Fatin, said, it is intellectually draining and spiritually draining, emotionally draining what is happening. Every time I see an attack, I feel attacked personally as a Christian, and I feel that my brothers and sisters are suffering, and that the world, although nowadays Copts are more in the news, but they only make the news when they're being attacked, and people still do not know enough about the Coptic Church and about what Copts are going through in Egypt, how it is to live there daily, and to always have somehow a threat over your head. And yet, as Bishop Angelos said so wonderfully, still being resilient and strong in coming to church. So I felt if I try something and put it on the Huffington Post, maybe it is another voice, but also I wanted to add to the voice of Pope Francis, who has been really doing a wonderful job saying there are more martyrs today than in the early church. And I think he's right. I mean, in Egypt and across other nations in the world, we think about the rest of the Middle East, Christians are being persecuted for their faith in different ways. And I felt that that also we should highlight this resilience and this deep, deep faith that the Copts prefer martyrdom over giving up their faith and over life, so to speak. And so that is what made me write that piece. But also, your other question was, what has changed? I think many things have changed. The world is paying attention, and one of the things that we learned this week is that the United Nations condemned the attack, that was, I think, a step forward. And like you said, like several of you said, the government is paying more attention. President Al-Sisi is paying more attention, but you are dealing with a cancer that has been growing for many, many years, and that is the problem. Bishop Angelos mentioned that as well. You know, during the time of Saad, all this came out. It had started before that, but it came out in the open. And for example, the other day, a Coptic friend of mine posted on Facebook a video of a lady from Egypt talking about Copts stashing weapons in the church and wanting an independent country. And I thought, oh my gosh, that was 50 years ago they were saying that. Someone is still thinking that. How can this be? So there is so much ignorance, and there's so much, basically, fake news. I mean, there's a lot to say about fake news these days that is going around, and the Egyptian authorities and also the religious authorities have let it go, and we see now that also the Muslim authorities are really becoming aware that they have created a monster that is not going to just attack the Copts, it's also going to attack them. And for example, in February, there was a Declaration of Citizenship and Coexistence that was issued by the Azhar and several other Islamic leaders. So they are trying to turn around, you know, a boat that is going towards an iceberg. They're trying to really do something, and they have almost a generation of work to do because it took over a generation to get here and to create what we see today. And it is you know, this huge underlying foundation of suspicion, of prejudice against the Copts. What shocks me, for example, was when I learned that when the victims phoned the authorities, phoned the police, they did not believe them, that they had been attacked. I mean, who would make something like that up? And so we are seeing very slowly a change, but we have to realize that a change like that will take time, and that I really thank God for the leadership of the Coptic Church that is trying to be part of that change all the time and trying to keep the channels of conversation open. But I feel that, in short, that the number of conversation partners is increasing. Before that, nobody listened, and now people are starting to pay attention, and so maybe we are opening new chapters, unfortunately, after very, very many people will have suffered.
Yes, yes. You are indeed, in a sense, there are positive elements, strong positive elements, like President Sisi and many in the pyramid under him. Of course, he is the head of a pyramid, and the pyramid changing color, changing spirit. And it started in Russia with one man, Gorbachev, who would said that communism will disappear. So now we are saying, who would say hatred and terrorism will disappear? But it may take one leader to inspire a nation. And especially the following. You as professor of Islamic studies, and you have one foot in Coptic studies and one foot in Islamic studies, or half of your brain is here and half your brain is there. Let me say that the Quran emphatically grants sanctity and absolute value to the lives even for non-Muslims. Specifically, Surah number 7, verse 156 tells the faithful, quote, if one amongst pagans, not people of the book, even pagans, asks you for asylum, grant it to him, so that he may hear the word of God, and then escort him to where he can be secure. What more emphasis on the sanctity of life, and how these terrorists bring other verses out of context, I would like to invite you to elaborate on this, and the way forward. Should I be well versed in the Quran as a Copt to address these issues? I know you have experience in Indonesia, especially with Indonesian women forming forums to change course from male-dominated fatwas that are destructive to the nation and society, while Muslim women in Indonesia are taking the course in the right direction today. What's your advice for us Copts in terms of Islamic thought?
Well, the thing is that with any holy book, it really depends on what people do with it. And we have to also acknowledge that many people don't quite know their own holy books that well. I mean, if we look at any given church or any given mosque, who really does deep study of the texts and who really takes the time to truly trying to understand the text, often people rely on what the leader tells them. And so we have a huge, massive underbelly at the grassroots level, at the village level, at the small towns level, where all kinds of, in this case, imams say the strangest things. And people believe them because they think this is the person of authority, this is the person who has learned, so they believe their interpretation. So the mindset, we're looking at a mindset that has been created over centuries, and the only way to change it is by education, by changing school books, but also by changing the education of those leaders and of those preachers. And you will never change everybody. That is impossible. But right now, and I think actually I almost want to make a connection with what happened in London and in Paris and in Manchester, which was horrible. In a way, I think that people have underestimated the power of local religious leaders, that they are in positions of authority, and that people listen to them, and that, when someone who has a certain education hears them, might think, oh, this is nonsense, nobody's going to believe that. But some people take it seriously, and they take it literally. And that is what we are seeing, and we have to acknowledge in places like Egypt and Indonesia and in the States, not everybody is very highly educated, or not everybody is interested in learning more about what the text actually says. And so that is something that we are facing. It has to start from really kindergarten onwards, that children are being educated in an inclusive way, and at least are taught respect for each other, and are taught respect, and are taught that God created the world and the people that are in there, and that that it is not up to us to tell the children, because it starts at the level of the schools. I used to hear that from my friends, the Tasumis from Beni Suef, who were teaching in schools, and they would tell me how during the breaks, children would divide each other when they would play, and they said that was something new, and that started during the 80s. That children would talk about each other in terms of other religions. That is something that has to change, and that is very difficult. But that needs the political will. It needs the will of the authorities, of the political authorities and the religious authorities. This is something that everybody has to work on. And I know that, for example, in the Coptic Church, Amba Musa has been working on this very, very hard, and the whole Coptic Church has been working on this. And there have been schools being opened. For example, Amba Pachomius told me a few years ago that he wanted to open more schools. I don't know if he managed to do that, because he is quite elderly now, but you know, they realize it is the children where you have to start. It's the schooling where you have to start. And so I think if the Coptic Church can have a huge role in this, because once there is the will of the authorities to do this, then actually the Church has a system that it has created over the years that it can strengthen or revive or reopen or continue. So basically, I think there are many opportunities, and also the world is going through a very strange phase. It's as if everybody is going backwards rather than forwards, which is always a sign that something new is coming. And so, but before it comes, we have to suffer. You mentioned yourself Gorbachev. Before these things happen, there is a big pushback against someone like Gorbachev, and then suddenly everything falls and everything changes. And so that is, I sometimes think that we are also at that tipping point. But the tipping point means that those who don't want anything to change, they will step up their efforts and attack more ferociously. And so, you know, it is in a way, let us hope that what we are looking at is the birth of something new, and that we are looking at the pains which are being carried by many people right now. But basically what I'm saying, it's education, it's religious leadership, it's supported by the politics and by the leadership of a nation. It comes down to that.
Yeah, Doctor, thank you, Nelly. Maybe Fatin would, what do you like to say, even perhaps as an educator, and you have the dilemma of hate messages filling textbooks for 40 years. So it will take would it take another 40 years to reverse that indoctrination into hatred in Egyptian schools?
Well, that's a good question. How many years is it going to take? That's one question. But I think we are on a very good start. The reason is, why do we have
I'm delighted to hear that.
I am too. I mean, to be honest. Well, you know, the reason is we know that the problem is an ideological problem. We know that this is ideology. This is what the people think of. It's indoctrination. There is indoctrination on every level of the society. So the children who are born in Egypt, in Muslim families, are indoctrinated by the mosques, by the society, by their parents, by the television programs, by the educational system. Eventually, you know, they subscribe to this extremist ideology. As you said in the beginning, you know, you see different levels of subscription to this ideology from the north to the south. In Armenia, we know it's one of the worst cases where they subscribe to a bigger extent to this extremist ideology and therefore partake of these sort of heinous crimes. In the north, you have intellectuals who are able to write and express their points of view, and this is something new.
Yeah.
You know, when I was growing up in Egypt, we did not have any writers or any authors who would actually say that this is wrong and this is nonsense. On the contrary, you would hear all of these strange things that would be, you know, said and proclaimed on television by the imams, and you would have all of the spewing of hate against Christians, and nobody would respond to it.
Right. Yeah.
And the only way that you would get the response would be among the Copts, between them in their own closed communities, where they would say, look, this is wrong, this is nonsense, and they affirm each other's faith. But today, we are intellectually engaged, all of us. And I think this is amazing. Like, for example, I mean, it is a global problem. But as you can see, Manchester is involved, Paris is involved, the United States is involved, Egypt is involved, the president of Egypt is involved. The president of Egypt says all the right things. He recognizes the problem. And yes, he has a lot of work to do because you cannot erase ideology. You cannot easily remove it from the minds of people, especially if they have been brought up to believe that this is the right way of thinking. It is very difficult to have them abandon it without such a broad intellectual discussion that happens on the local, international, and global level. You know, in other words, we really need this intellectual engagement. And the more we engage with one another, and the more Muslims respond to Muslims, the more moderate Muslims clarify to other Muslims, the more each one of us, and the more Copts explain all the misunderstandings and the problems that they perceive in the faith. Once we all sort of, talk about all of this, the more we talk about it, the more the counter-narrative is strengthened, and the more you will find that less people will subscribe to these ideologies. How long is this process going to take? It took us 30, 40 years, right? We have a generation, actually, I think it's even more than that, because it started in the 1960s. So we're really talking, and even before that, the precepts of the Muslim Brotherhood. So we really have, what?
80 years.
I think so, yes. We have some of them who've already passed away, So these have raised generations, all right?
Yeah. And the Muslim Brotherhood is still very active and in control of some even American media.
Yes.
Is either owned or on the board of directors or the money is flowing or whatever.
With very dangerous tenants. With very dangerous tenants.
And wicked program and means.
Yes.
Yeah.
But as I said, the more we speak about it, the more we intellectually discuss it. And we do this especially in Egypt and in all the countries that is, suffering from this, the better we are.
Yeah. Thank you. Professor van Doorn-Harder, if I may ask you for a concluding remark, but only after I again invite you to respond to Surah in the Quran, Surah 6, verse 107, emphasizes the freedom of religion and declares that. And it reads in English translation, if it had been God's plan, they would not have taken false gods. So even if the infidels have false gods in Muslim eyes, it is God's plan. So you are not allowed to object to it, because listen to the next verse. But we, God, made you, Muslims, not one to watch over their doings. God, Allah is telling the Muslims in the Quran, Surah 6, 107, not to watch over their doings, nor are you set over them to dispose of their affairs, let alone kill them. What do you think? And along with your concluding remark.
Well, it is true. The Quran says, I think it is very clear when God says, if God would have wanted, He would have not created us in diversity, right?
Yes.
And it's very clear. God says the diversity is what I created, what I want. And I want people to respect it. And but there is an issue of competition. There is an issue of power. And once one group thinks they're better than the others, then it is very difficult to teach people otherwise. It needs a certain form of humility to accept this kind of readings. And like I said before, people read what they want to read, and then they ignore in the Holy Scriptures what they want to ignore.
Yes.
There are many people who pick and choose. They only pick what suits them. And it does require a great sense of humility to say, well, if God says this, then maybe I should obey, whether I like it or not, right? Because obeying means that I have to put myself on the same level as some other people that I actually look down upon. And that basically goes for all of us. We can all think of groups that we don't think are quite there, or that we believe weird things. So it is something, the human inclinations for power, for controlling, for competition, and we have to give it up. And I mean, the Bible is full of it, and in the Quran there's also many verses that call people, to truly try to follow the wish of God with this as a first step, and we learned that from the monks. We have to be humble. It is very simple. And we have to not only rely on our own thoughts. So my concluding remark would be what God says, what it says in Isaiah, my ways are not your ways. And the word of the Lord will never return empty. And that is what I truly believe, that the blood that was spilled on the way to the St. Samuel Monastery in Tranta and Alexandria, in the book of Hosea, that it will not be spilled in vain. That in the end, that, that those who persist in doing good, that they will be victorious.
Thank you so much. Indeed, as your conclusion, also in the article in the Huffington Post, again, I read it before, but I love to read it also now, that after each attack, Copts regain strength, drawing courage from the martyrs, the old and the new ones, as one day they themselves might be forced to join that heavenly troop. So even if martyr happens, as much as we love life and be productive in the society, if God allows evil to kill the body, we have trust and hope in eternal life, and the value of the blood of the martyrs is an eternal value. Thank you so much, Professor Nelly van Doorn-Harder.
Thank you, and thank you to Dr. Fatin too. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you. It's a pleasure to get to know you.
We look forward to future episodes and hoping for good news next round. That's great. That there is, Abu Qurqas, the village of Fikriya in around 1993, masked killers went into church during a youth meeting and killed 27 people. 1993. Of course, the Egyptian media did not report it, except a few days later, and they polished the story to suit them, and or whatever happens, they could blame a Coptic seller and a buyer Muslim argued about money, and they got heated discussion, and one killed the other. What about 29 people killed in the next 24 hours in the town? How many Christian homes were burned? They don't talk about that. But now it's different. Now the story goes out to the whole world. Even they were videotaping the event of the massacre in the bus on the 26th of May. Somebody managed to get some cell phone video and pictures, and it's spread around the world.
And I think this is one of the main reasons why you're getting a better version of the truth. It is also, it's difficult to deflect, and it's difficult to obscure truth. Yeah. But I mean, the art of obscuring truth has always been there. It's the way you narrate the story. It's the way the press decides to release it or to tell the story. And usually because the government in Egypt is in power, whoever who is in power is able to spin the story the way they like it.
Yeah.
So as you quite rightly pointed in the beginning of this episode, you said, they would use words like clashes, all right?
Clashes,
there was no clash.
Right.
There was aggression from one group of people against the other.
Yeah.
And it was physical aggression that led to death. It can't get any worse.
Yeah.
And I mean, the idea that I can obscure the truth by using a word like clashes, like, two people fought, so something, bad happened, can't be helped, is an attempt to obscure the truth. Not to say what has happened so that people can get away with it. Exactly like it's willful, it is done on purpose, exactly like what has happened in the hospital where they are trying to write the report, to miswrite the report, to misreport it and say, well, it wasn't a bullet, it was shock or trauma or whatever nonsense, all right?
Yeah.
And get away with this nonsense because they think they can.
Yeah.
Right?
And will be perhaps rewarded by their superiors.
And highly likely the person believes he will be rewarded in heaven as well.
And above and beyond that.
So, you know, in other words, you have this sort of very distorted image of what this person is doing. He's doing a huge, he's lying, doing a huge injustice, is abetting and aiding murder, is doing everything that is wrong. But in his own eyes, he thinks he's doing something good. He's doing a favor to his God because his God needs favors. And at the same time, he also thinks that the government, you know, or his superiors are going to be happy, and by the way, they will be happy.
Yeah.
You know, because in this area, in Minya specifically, we have sort of, you know, most of these people have subscribed to these extremist concepts, and they think that, you know, Coptic human life is of no value. Or, I mean, if you take it, then, you know, you've done a service to humanity or a service to the Lord. Whatever that may be, yes, this is exactly what is happening. Now, if this is the truth. Now, were we able to get this truth out? No. We were not able to access the newspapers. We were not, and up till now, by the way, we were not able to access many, in the United States, we're not able to access many news channels. They refuse to listen to this version of the story because for some other reason. What is the reason? You know, I told you that, you know, when I heard about the Palm Sunday, we were supposed to give an interview on one of the liberal channels, and they canceled it.
Yeah.
And we expected, you know, that they will cancel.
Right.
And you mean, you're surprised. Why? Don't you want to hear what the Copts have to say?
No,
it's something that has happened, you know, among the Copts. There are Copts that live there. Aren't you interested?
The Muslim Brotherhood infiltrated many media outlets. Some of the Arab countries who own petrodollars and gold, they bought percentage of the stock in several of these media outlets in America, in Britain, elsewhere, and they have a system of bribing the reporters and writers and rewarding those who. And imagine if it is happening in America between the Republicans and the Democrats with so much unethical. I'm not going to say from which side. I don't want to change the course of the program here now. But the ethics disappearing, even in what we call a most democratic country.
Absolutely.
But democracy is becoming a fake democracy in the sense of people are prejudiced. It is not voting for the truth or the benefit of the country. It's voting on the party line. So imagine this immersed in religious conviction of violent implications. But there are good news. Good news, the world is starting to hear the Coptic story, starting to hear the Coptic narrative from the truth side, because it was clashes between Christians and Muslims in the past, falsely reported as such. Now they cannot say clashes as much as they used to say so. They either ignore the story altogether or put it on page 17 or make a very short story. But Pope Francis called them martyrs, our Coptic martyrs, our Coptic brethren martyrs, twice. And he even celebrated a special mass on their memory. So even the United Nations Security Council stood a moment of silence for the martyrs en route to the Monastery of St. Samuel. And we watch video number 3 now, how this was reported on one of the news channel. This was not done perhaps ever before, and the United Nations Security Council they don't have time to have a moment of silence for every violence that's happening every day of the year. Now in the world against Christians, somewhere in the world, there is some Christians are killed around the world every day. But to do it for the martyrs of St. Samuel Monastery was remarkable, especially against the background we are talking about. So let us, can we watch video number 3 now?
The United Nations has strongly condemned Friday's deadly attack on Coptic Christians in Egypt, in which at least 28 people were killed and dozens more wounded. The swift condemnation from the Secretary General and the Security Council capped a week of attacks in Africa and deepened concerns about terrorist groups ISIL and Al-Shabaab. Our UN correspondent Lillington reports.
UN Chief Antonio Guterres said there can be no justification for the horrific violence that took place on Friday when gunmen opened fire on a bus carrying Coptic Christians to a monastery in Egypt's Minya province. Strong words from the Security Council as well, which called the attack heinous and cowardly and underlined the need to bring those responsible to justice, be they perpetrators, organizers, financiers or sponsors of the.
Yeah, as we see them, the Security Council of the United Nations standing a moment of silence in honor of the Coptic martyrs. It's comforting. And we are the Church of the Martyrs. And even we have a song in Arabic, أم الشهداء جميلة عروس الفادي القبطية وضياء بلاد المصرية أهواك يا أرثوذكسية أم الشهداء جميلة أم الشرفاء نبيلة عبرت بحر الألمات حفظت بدماها الحق قويم. The church, the mother of the martyrs, is beautiful. That's an Arabic song that the Copts sing in the church calendar on the beginning of the Coptic year, on the 11th of September of every year, the day 1 of the Coptic calendar. They sing this song for 2-3 weeks during that season, the mother of the martyrs. It's called the calendar of the martyrs, the ancient Coptic calendar, which is, by the way, is the most ancient calendar in the world because it's built upon the same calendar the ancient Egyptians had for thousands of years. Dr. Fatin, can we show the map on the screen of the Monastery of St. Samuel in Elmenia, please, the control room? Yeah, here is the map. You see the dear Amba Samuel on the left side. That is the western desert from the Nile Valley in the governorate of Minya and the city of Al-Adwa and the Maghaga on the Nile. And you go about 30 miles to the west. And above it there is Lake Qarun in the area of Fayoum. And the area of Fayoum and Deir Amba Samuel had monks from the 4th century. And we see the Monastery of St. Anthony straight to the east by the Red Sea, by the Gulf of Suez. They are marked, the Deir of St. Anthony and the Monastery of St. Paul. And so these areas, all of these dots on the map are monasteries. These are like less than 1% of what used to be in Egypt 1400 years ago. When the Arabs invaded Egypt in 639, there were thousands of monasteries and tens of thousands of monks and nuns. We are left with only like 1% of what used to be for one reason or another. But the events of the last 3 years or 40 years of attacks on monasteries and churches and Christians and expelling them from their homes and towns proves that the sword took a toll on monastic life in Egypt and churches and Coptic life and Christianity in general. And what we see today in terms of property is like 1%. In terms of number of monks and nuns, 1% of what used to be. We saw it in Iraq and Syria and only in the last 10 years. They dropped by 80%. So it happened in our generation. So imagine 1400 years would result in the dilemma and the tragedy, Middle East Christianity, let alone in Asia Minor, Turkish invasion of Asia Minor in 6 centuries ago, downsized Christianity from millions and millions, 100% of the population, to less than 1/10 of the population. It's in God's hands. Absolutely. But would you kindly, Dr. Fatin, enlighten us on the life of Saint Samuel himself and his monastery? I know he lived in the 7th century, right?
He actually passed away at the end of the 7th century. Yeah. He lived 100 years, almost 100 years, so he had a very long life. Out of this 100 years, he lived about 56 years in that particular monastery. Now, what is interesting is that this monastery, actually, when he went to this monastery was actually abandoned. And he just found a church there. But he was fleeing from persecution himself. It was a hard time for the Copts during that time, because that was the time when the Byzantine ruler actually adopted the Chalcedonian version of Christianity, and were in disagreement with the Coptic Church. So anyway, he had to flee, and because he rejected the dogma and that what they presented him with, or I mean, they attempted actually to resolve some of the dogmatic issues that caused the schism in the church, and he rejected this sort of cooked solution. So anyway, he did sort of flee into the inner desert, and he found this church, and he started the monastery. And the monastery was named after him. Historically, we know that there were monks living from maybe the 2nd or the 3rd century in that area. We're not sure if they lived the synoptic life or not, but highly likely they lived in isolated caves. But we know that there was, quite a busy monastic life in that area. But for one reason or the other, it has ceased to exist. And when he went, the church was still left. And he went to the church and he renovated it, and he sort of prepared it for life. And eventually he managed to grow this monastery to about 200, they say about 120 monks and 200 something, a word that we're not able to decipher what does it mean, but it may be assistants, people who are sitting there, students. But anyway, obviously it was a well-populated monastery. He has suffered, so many people consider him, although he did not die as a martyr, he is considered a martyr because of the many suffering that he has seen in his life. His most important manuscript is the Apocalypse, or his most important work. The one that he is known for is the Apocalypse of Samuel of Calamon.
Can the control room show us the manuscript of St. Samuel Vision or Apocalypse?
The Apocalypse
of St. Samuel. This is the page on the left side. You see when they write, this manuscript is from the National Library of Paris in France, and this manuscript was scripted in about 1606 AD, but there is dispute about how this came. The manuscript speaks that because St. Samuel was contemporary to the invasion of the Arabs to Egypt, and he had direct communication with them, they attribute this to him, that he saw bad things are coming and so on.
He did. I mean, this is what the crux of this apocalypse is. Right. It's a vision. It's a prophetic vision.
So I want to ask you, because you had similar experience with the vision of Theophilus.
Yes.
And if the viewer would go to Amazon.com and check for Nelly van, Fatin, Maurice Guirguis, and the Vision of Theophilus. You can buy her translation to the book, and I'm grateful your PhD dissertation was on the Vision of Theophilus and how it served as a factor or force to strengthen the resilience of the Copts in their land, in Egypt, based on the vision of Theophilus about the route of the Holy Family in Egypt. So that's your Coptic literature specialty. So what do you think of this vision, and what do you make of it?
Well, you know, I used it actually in my work. I did refer to it and I did work on it. We only have the Arabic, the one that we see here. Yeah. But this Arabic is a translation of the Coptic original. And studies have shown that the Coptic original at least goes back to the 8th century. Now, people try, or I mean scholars try to deny that it is an authentic work by Samuel of Calamon. The reason is because the prophecy is so clear. I mean, he says things that, you know...
That happened.
Yeah, absolutely, and they happened many centuries after that. So he will specifically say that the Arabs are going to expand to India. You know, he will give borders to where their kingdom is going to be. And... also, I mean, he doesn't give a flattering view. I mean, he was, as you said, he lived contemporaneous. You know, he lived at the same time that the Arab invasion happened. And our history book says that the Copts, that the monks were thrilled. I mean, that the Arabs came and invaded Egypt. Scholarly work shows otherwise. And this is one of the very good works. And he's asked, what do you think of this? And is it going to last for too long? You know, it's an invasion. This is what it is. So is this invasion going to last? And he says, yes, it will last. And it's going to last for very long. And he said that it's going to have a negative impact on the Copts. And he actually says it's going to have a devastating effect on the Copts. And he starts to say, what is this devastating effect? He says it will begin with this loss of language. So they will no longer speak Coptic. And as a result, their relationship with their history, their culture, and their faith and their religion will be severed. And he says, what is even worse is that the parents are going to be thrilled that their children are learning Arabic, not realizing that in doing so and in not teaching them Coptic, they are going to suffer, you know, in terms of faith. He also laments the loss of Coptic names, the loss of Coptic identity, and eventually the loss of Christian morals. And
yeah, I read about the loss of Christian morals here.
And he laments
how the Copts are going to fight each other, and.
Yes.
So but as if we went through the reversal. I mean, Christian morals went down, but under persecution, recent persecution, the morals are going high.
Well, it depends. Let's put it this way. You know, we cannot always exalt ourselves as the ideal nation. We have some people, like those who accept martyrdom, obviously are well-versed in their faith, are noble people, who have, you know, the Spirit of God in them. You see in them the divine, the grace of God. And there are others, of course, who don't meet these standards and who have been affected and, you know, who make wrong choices. So we don't want to idealize ourselves as a nation. But as I say, you know, yes, what he's saying is true. And right now, what we see is a living Synaxarium, is a living hagiography.
Yes.
All right. And, you know, one of the things, you know, as a literature professor, we know about the repetition of human life. So stories don't really have that much. And when you read the Synaxarium, even for the children, the story is, you know, this saint was born on that day, and then, you know, these evil things happened to him, and then he was martyred. And this is exactly what we have today, you know.
Yeah.
We have the life of normal people, and then these people are confronted with the ultimate test. They die, they are martyred, and then, you know, they receive the crown of martyrdom. So we have, but this time we've got the videos.
Yes.
So we get to see the hagiography sort of, you know, in real life.
Did you see the video by Samia Adli? If the viewer would Google or go to YouTube and write in Arabic Samia Adli or in English, you will get like several, 5-6 videos in which Samia Adli, who is the grandmother from Illinois that went to visit in Egypt, and her husband and 2 children and 2 grandchildren were killed in front of her eyes, and see her words of blessing to the killers and praying for them that God may soften their hearts, and so they may regret and repent before it's too late for their eternal life, and for words of forgiveness. Amazing. If we had time, we would have watched it, but also back to the vision of Theophilus, or the Apocalypse of Samuel. The viewer can check it on Google. Check the vision or apocalypse of, you get it both ways, vision or apocalypse. You get it on Google where you can find it. You can even download this from the National Library in Paris. But also, there is translation.
Yes.
Look for that translation on Google. Very interesting to read.
Yeah, it's the Tertullian. It's the Tertullian website that has it.
Okay.
And I mean, yeah, it's a beautiful, it's easy read, and it's fun. It's fun to read, actually.
Coptic literature.
It is. It's a wonderful piece of Coptic literature, and it's just fun to read. It's it exposes what history, what our Coptic history and tradition is like.
If we may conclude now, but I want to do 2 things. Ask you for a concluding word. And we want to watch St. Kirill Choir from London. They had a concert called Anastasis. Anastasis means Qiyamat al-Masih. If you go to their website, stkirillchoir.com, you can watch more or buy these DVDs. They had it on the Feast of the Resurrection in 2016 in London, and his Eminence Metropolitan Pachomius of Beheira was in attendance. I selected Al-Masihu Qama min al-Amwat, Christ is risen from the dead, in Coptic and in English, as is sung by the Copts, Coptic choir, and the Greek Orthodox choir side by side, and then they joined together in the presence of Metropolitan Pachomius, who attended specially because to give a word of encouragement from him personally and from His Holiness Pope Tawadros. And this, a few weeks ago, Pope Tawadros was in Austria and attended the same choir in Austria that combined several groups from around Europe, but especially at the core group was the people from London and Paris who are in this episode that we will watch now. Shall we ask for a concluding remark after we watch a few minutes? And let us watch the video of the music for St. Kirill Choir.
Oh that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it.
Christ is risen from the dead. Christ is risen from the dead. By his death he triumphed, and to those who were in the tomb he granted life.
حاجة جميلة جدا إن نيافة الأنبا بخوميوس والأرش بيشوب His Eminence Metropolitan Bachhomius and the Greek Orthodox Archbishop and other Coptic bishops. I recognize Bishop Angelos, and it's a celebration of Christ's resurrection, and that's befitting for this event of martyrdom on the 26th of May. It was the next day after the Ascension feast. And in the funeral, in that case, people who died during the 50 days of the Pascha celebrate. The church does not sing sad tunes, funeral tunes. It sings Christos Anesti, Christ is risen. So this would be the choir singing in the funeral with exactly the same music. That's the Coptic Church tradition. Concluding remark.
I'm actually just reminded of something that I'd like to share with all of you. It's just, there is a beautiful YouTube that a friend of mine has showed me, which says, it is Friday, but Sunday is coming.
Yes.
Sunday is the Sunday of the resurrection. Yes, there were martyrs, but Sunday is coming. It's a new beginning. The ultimate beginning, not only for the martyrs, but for every Christian who has hope that, whatever death, whatever we meet in life, will only lead to a long, happy, eternal life. It witnesses to God, it witnesses to Christ, it witnesses to faith. It's a great learning opportunity for the rest of the world to see what does it mean to have grace and to understand the value of human life. That human life is not something that you sort of, spend over earth, on earth and just try and waste it to the best of your ability, but that it is an opportunity for immortality, and that this is possible, and that there is, a lot of things that God has given us that we can use. I think it witnesses to the Muslims. It witnesses to the whole world. It gives them a glimpse of the nobility of the Christian life and of the value of life, rather than its waste like this.
Yeah. Absolutely, I agree, and share with you and share with you the faith and the belief in all what you just said. If Satan thought he won Christ on Good Friday and Christianity died completely forever, he got a big surprise on Sunday morning.
Absolutely.
And that's our belief, and that's the secret of Coptic resilience for 2,000 years. Our viewers, thank you for watching. Logos TV Coptic Civilization program. See you next episode. I'm Michael Saad.